Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we'll be exploring the work of explorer Kira Salak and her experiences in Libya regarding the fortress of the Jinn, or Kaf Ajnoun. Now, this particular story was passed on to me by Peter Mark Adams in a correspondence between us, discussing the Jinn and some of my own travel experiences. And he pointed me in the direction of this story. Kaf Ajnoun is a jagged ridge with several peaks, the largest being the Qala'a, or the castle, along the Libya/Algerian border near the town of Ghat by the Akakus Massif. As it is in the Sahara, the native people are the nomads of the Tuareg and Tibu tribes. Looking like a haunted citadel crowned with a magical fortress-like summit, the mountain was thus assumed to be the abode of mythical beings. According to Berber Tuareg mythology, the Devil's Hill was once a hall of council where genies met to discuss their affairs. According to the explorer Hugh Clapperton, who visited the area in 1822, some of the inhabitants of the mountain, apparently with red hair, were heard to beat their drums at night and fire their muskets. Adventurer and traveller Kira Salak, who followed the trail of Hugh Clapperton, climbed to the summit with her photographer friend Bobby Model. She reached the top and back safely without any encounters, but according to her, around 18 months later, during an ayahuasca session in Peru, she discovered she had been possessed by evil spirits that entered her body when, against the warnings of the local tribesmen, she climbed a supposedly haunted mountain in Libya. The possession and subsequent exorcism will be discussed in the Plus show, but if you can't wait for that, you can read the account via the show notes below. What you're about to hear is the writing of Kira Salak as published in National Geographic. The story does have a sad ending, as I will go through at the end of the show. Her climbing companion Bobby Model, who, after a tragic accident in South Africa, died in 2009 after 2 years of medical treatment back in the US. If you're watching this on YouTube, or indeed looking through the show notes, the photography you'll see is his. As a photographer and a traveller myself, I just want to say that Bobby's work was absolutely amazing and his photography was incredible. And I hope you rest in peace. Now, before we start, a thank you to my Ank patron members, Michelle, Merrily, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Austin, Ali, Carrie S, Brennan, Tyler, Madeline, Jorge, Tony, Savannah, Icaro, William O, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, and Pamela. Thank you all. Right, let's get into it. Libya, the land of cruel deaths. So this was published in National Geographic Adventure magazine sometime, I think, between 2005 and 2006. And it was the winner of the Lowell Thomas Award for Foreign Reporting. "You come, madame," the man says to me. He wants to show me something special. And maybe it's the sincere look in his eyes, the supplication, the knowing. But I follow this complete stranger across Tripoli's Green Square and through the stone gate of the ancient Medina, or historic Arab quarter. It's my first night in Libya. I arrived only 3 hours ago in a country that's still a mystery of culture, shock and conjecture. So many people told me not to come here. Terrorist cell, they warned, Al-Qaeda, don't forget the Lockerbie bombing, and of course, Muammar Qadhafi, global pariah, former patron of every rogue cause the world over. The US State Department advises extreme caution. It all gives me the shivers, like entering a house that's supposedly haunted. I keep looking over my shoulder. Can people tell I'm American? My shoes, maybe, the brand of my jacket. Such paranoia. Few are out tonight. It's the eve of Eid al-Fitr, the 3-day Muslim holiday that marks the end of the month-long fast of Ramadan. The storekeepers look at me curiously as I pass, and I touch my hair before their glances. Most Libyan women wear headscarves and long coats to hide the shape of their bodies. Libyan men wear whatever they please, Western clothes, usually, though some prefer the traditional North African jilliba, baggy pants and shirt reaching to the knees. An old woman passes, wrapped head to toe in a white garment. A burnous held tightly over her face, a single eye peering out at me through the folds. Otherwise, the Medina is mostly deserted. The small stores, like lighted vestibules in the dark and cavernous depths of the old city. The old man urges me down a dim passageway, but I pause at the edge of the shadows. "Where are we going?" I demand in French. "What do you want to show me?" "Something special," he insists, beckoning. I sigh and follow, and we enter the heart of the Medina, built over the ancient Roman town of Oasis. Its carved columns are still visible in the corners of the buildings. Modernity has all but vanished here, and I trespass in a time where donkey carts shuddered by and slaves were driven down the narrow streets. "Come, come," the man urges. We go deeper into the labyrinth. Great stone arches cross overhead, cutting shadows across the dank walkways. The scent of incense wafts down the corridors, our footsteps loud and impudent in the silence. The man stops. He enters a clothing store and sends away a young boy tending it. Stepping behind the front counter, he raises his eyebrows at me in a conspiratorial confidence. "Come," he whispers. I do. I step forward gingerly. He looks out at the front of the store, at the aisles around him. No one. He slowly pulls out something small, balled in his fists, eyes wide and intent on me. He shakes it out. "Yes, madame," he asks. "You want to buy?" I lean down to see what it is. A lace bra with matching thong panties. It's hard to know what's real in Libya. I finger the Qadhafi t-shirts in a gift shop in the Roman ruins of Leptis Magna outside Tripoli. Qadhafi poses on them like a rock star, face hardened and puckered, eyes gazing majestically towards the clouds. He hangs on every building, in every city intersection, large and wide and belligerent over the streets. There aren't billboards in Libya. There is Qadhafi. His country used to be one of the poorest in Africa until, in 1959, Esso, now Exxon, discovered massive oil deposits beneath the sands. And not just a trickle, these were the largest petroleum reserves on the African continent. Western nations salivated at the prospect of buying cheap oil, and Libya soon became the richest nation on the continent. Qadhafi, though, with his chameleon-like policy changes and about-face gestures towards the West, remains something of an enigma. From the very moment he took up Libya's reins in 1969, only 24 years old, Qadhafi seized the oil-rich nation from the monarchy in a near-bloodless coup. Then, in a country larger than Alaska with a population smaller than Connecticut's, he began testing his third universal theory, a self-created political philosophy that meshes, among other things, 19th century French anarchist thought with 1,400-year-old diktats of the Quran. A few years after taking power, Qadhafi went off into contemplative exile, returning with his manifesto, the Green Book, an allusion to Mao's Little Red Book, which denounces capitalism and communism as variations on slavery and spurns all political parties as forms of dictatorship and advocates direct rule by People's Committee according to Islamic law. To Qadhafi's credit, most Libyans will tell you he could have gone the way of the corrupt Idris monarchy preceding him and pocketed most of the oil funds for himself and his cronies. Instead, noticeably, life for Libyans dramatically improved. Qadhafi promised a home for all Libyans, and to the best of his ability tried to deliver on that promise. At least in the beginning. Great modern cities and new residential areas rose from the dust of the Sahara. Entire populations living in ancient mud-brick caravan towns in the desert moved to modern dwellings with running water, electricity and satellite TV. A country which had only decades before been sucking on the largesse of international aid organizations now possessed the highest GDP in Africa. Libya had become a kind of latter-day utopia. The store clerk asks my nationality, and I tell him the truth, American. I've been telling some people that I'm Canadian. Seems safer, easier, in a country that has an American aggression postage stamp series. But the man smiles broadly and enthusiastically. "American," he repeats, as if to make sure he's heard right. I nod. "Ah, you're welcome to Libya." I wish I could believe him. Not very long ago, Americans weren't very welcome here. In 1981, with Qadhafi openly supporting nearly every revolutionary or Islamic extremist cause in the world, from the IRA to the Philippines, Abu Sayyaf to the PLO, President Ronald Reagan declared Libya a state sponsor of terrorism and severed all diplomatic ties. Qadhafi was by that time doing everything possible to alienate himself from the West, and the US in particular. He engaged in sparring matches with American naval forces in the Mediterranean and was implicated in the 1986 German disco bombing that killed 20, including 2 American soldiers. In retaliation, Reagan bombed Libya's 2 largest cities, Tripoli and Benghazi, which only upped the animosity between the 2 countries. Before long, Qadhafi was using his vast oil revenue to develop chemical and biological weapons programs in cohorts with China and North Korea buying $20 billion in arms from the Soviet Union. And then in 1988 there was Lockerbie. Call it the defining moment between US-Libyan relations, and the event that would cement Libya's pariah status throughout the West. 2 men, believed to be Libyan secret agents, bombed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, sending 270 people to their death. It would take Qadhafi's delivery of 2 Lockerbie suspects to the UN's Criminal Tribunal in 1999, followed by his 2003 renouncement of weapons of mass destruction programs, to put him on the course of reconciliation with the West. US travel restrictions were finally moved in 2004, nearly 5 years after the EU lifted theirs, which explains why, of the hundreds of nationalities listed in the Leptis Magna guestbook, I come across only 2 Americans. The last time Libya was so close to the West was way back in the early 1800s, when most Europeans entered the country as slaves captured by the notorious Khazars of North Africa at the heart of the dreaded Barbary coast. Known ignominiously as Barbary to many Europeans, acquired much of its wealth from attacking Christian ships and towns and carrying off the people to sell as slaves. For centuries, towns as far north as Ireland and as far south as Sicily had their entire population stripped to the galleys and harems of North Africa, convincing terrified Europeans that anyone attempting to explore the Muslim Sahara could only meet with, as adventurer George Lyne put it, a cruel death. Still, this ominous reputation didn't stop Scotsman Hugh Clapperton, who in 1824 became the first Westerner to fully explore inner Libya, known as the Fizan, and reach the interior of Africa by crossing the Sahara. I've come to Libya, in part to follow his trail, to see how he accomplished such a difficult feat. Clapperton is a hero of mine and one of those old-time explorers who was always sick with one serious illness or another, dysentery, malaria, in a time when drinking mercury or bleeding was one's only medical recourse. Still, he plodded on through the triple-digit heat in the bandit-ridden Sahara. His journals, the fullest, most unbiased account of early Libya, were lost for nearly 2 centuries. They were finally unearthed in a South African archive and published for the first time in 2000. I carry Clapperton's journals with me now as I head out to the ruins, a couple of tourist policemen eyeing me. Groups of more than 2 foreigners aren't allowed to travel in Libya without the accompaniment of such government-assigned watchdogs. But as I'm travelling with only one other person, photographer Bobby Model, I escape most of the scrutiny. Still, we're the official wards of a Libyan tour agency. While independent travel is certainly possible in Libya, the lack of public transportation to many of the country's popular sites, many of which can only be reached with off-road vehicles, all but precludes this option for travellers on the cheap. Unless you take your own 4x4 into the country, which can be prohibitively expensive and involves substantial red tape with Libyan bureaucracy, the most viable option for visitors like Bobby and me is to join an adventure tour. I stand before the ruins, which are spectacular, there is no other word, and I'm not the kind of person who usually gets into Roman ruins, can only handle about a day of them, but here at Leptis Magna, Latin for the Great Leptis, the city is so well preserved that it allows you to dream. There are the marble-covered pools of the Hadriatic baths, great Corinthian columns rising 30 feet. There is the nearly intact Colosseum, 3 stories high, where you can crawl through line chutes and explore the gladiators' quarters. They don't make cities like this anymore. Every architectural detail attended to, no plan too lavish, no material too dear. Bearded Goths gaze down from the friezes. Maidens and warriors lounge amongst the carved porticos. Even the communal toilets remain largely unscathed. The marble seats shined by thousands of ancient buttocks. Libya is a land overflowing with antiquities. Beyond its extensive Roman and Greek ruins are some of the best ancient rock carvings in the world, testament to when the Sahara was once verdant and life-supporting. Many of Libya's southern mountain ranges are dotted with petroglyphs, magical scenes which began to be created some 12,000 years ago. Men hunting rhinoceroses and riding horse-drawn chariots. It reminds me that so many empires have come and gone in Libya. The Garamantes, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, Byzantines, and Arabs, and more recently the Turks, Italians, and British. Even for a few decades after World War II, the Americans, who operated an airbase on Libyan soil. I walked to a Roman lighthouse rising over the Mediterranean, following a beach littered with building stones from Leptis. Waves caressed the giant chunks of marble, slowly reducing them to smooth white pebbles beneath my feet. There's too much of Leptis to save. It was too great, too vast, that it could end. I shudder the thought. Theories abound about the cause of its demise: a great earthquake, a flood, the fall of the Romans, and the later invasions of the Arabs. Slowly, perhaps imperceptibly, the sands took over. Will that be, I wonder, the fate of Qadhafi's utopia? Driving anywhere in Libya takes days. It's larger than Alaska, with one of the lowest person per square mile ratios in the world. We cruise through the western desert, headed south, away from the mere 2% of arable land along the coast. The country appears as an empty wasteland of gravel plains and sand. Rarely does a bush break through the monotony of sky and earth. Rarer still are trees or animals. On occasion I catch a sight of a feral camel lumbering along the highway, but where it's going is a mystery. Water is absent from the landscape altogether, appearing only in half-hearted splurts from gas station spigots. It is easy to understand why the majority of Libya's population clings to the coast. I travel with a guide, Majdi, assigned to me by the Tripoli tour company. He's wary of me, knowing that I'm a writer. His friend recently took around a writer-photographer pair from England, discovering later that they worked for the BBC and had chosen Libya for their holidays in the Axis of Evil TV series. When the couple got back to the UK, they spun their innocuous Libyan tour into an exaggerated, terrifying journey into the heart of Islamic fundamentalism. The Libyan government protested. Majdi's delusional friend resigned as a tour guide, and now Majdi himself guards what he says to me. It doesn't help trying to explain to him that only the Brits could have come up with something as good as Holidays in the Axis of Evil TV show. Where are these terrorist cells in Libya? Majdi asks rhetorically as we drive along. I've never seen them. There is honesty in his voice, and frustration too, to have his country negatively typecast by the West. But of course, no one suspected such cells existed in the US either until September the 11th, 2001. I stare out at the rocky brown plain trailing off into heat waves. Are terrorist bogeymen out there somewhere, crouching in the dust, waiting to get their hands on me? According to the US State Department, you could bet on it. In the distance appears a flash of whitewashed buildings and a flourish of date palms. Ghadamis, the ancient Berber caravan town, sits among verdant Oasis fields, once a major stop on the old caravan route from Timbuktu, and still a way station for weary Saharan travellers, the Berbers, North Africa's indigenous people who speak their own language and maintain unique cultural traditions, make up an estimated 2% of Libya's largely Arab population. Ghadamis remains their stronghold in seas of sand, though it fell victim to Qadhafi's modernization plans. The inhabitants forced out en masse in the 1980s into modern apartments in the nearby new town. Some people, however, wouldn't leave this charmed place without a fight, and it's easy to see why. Gdamis is less a town than a gigantic labyrinth of narrow passageways that cut around and beneath adobe homes. Living here is like living in a subterranean world, the sun and its heat cut off by the rise of centuries-old buildings, each built into the next and accessed by an interlocking tunnel system. Now deserted, the town has an eerie quality of being just unearthed. Feeling like an archaeologist, I explore the dark, empty passageways with my flashlight, coming upon dead ends and mysterious chambers built from Roman columns. I squeeze through an open palm wood door, climbing dusty stairs to the highest floor. Part of the ceiling has fallen in, incongruous sunlight gleaming on white walls painted with cryptic red Berber designs. Maneuvering through crumbling piles of adobe bricks and debris, I reach the roof and gaze out on a scene out of Arabian Nights. Countless whitewashed terraces spreading towards the setting sun and distant sand hills of Algeria. Nearby, palm gardens resound with birdsong and the burbling of an aquifer water. The call to prayer wails from the squat mud minarets of a nearby adobe mosque, and I can only take it in all silently, reverentially like a devotee. I escape from the maze of streets and into the dusk of Gdami's new town. The evening strikingly sedate. Nightlife requires a new definition in a country without alcohol, where the population abides by strict codes of male-female conduct that require both sexes to stay virgins until marriage. There are no dance clubs, no bars, no young couples strolling down the street holding hands, and in conservative country towns like Gdami's, the subdued air feels like perpetual Sunday morning. I go in search of the town hotspot and discover it to be the local internet cafe, where crowds of young men play video games, enter English language chat rooms, and examine, however surreptitiously, Western porn sites. It takes me a few minutes to notice that there's not a single woman in the place. Away from the progressive cities of Tripoli and Benghazi, women stay largely in their home, out of sight. A local man, Mahmoud, tells me that women here aren't allowed to see or interact with males outside of their immediate family, including any would-be husband. I ask him, how does one go about getting a wife then, given such circumstances? If you fancy a girl, he says, let's call her Fatima, then you go to the father of Fatima and tell him you want to marry his daughter. But how, I ask? Do you know if you fancy a girl if you've never seen or talked to her before? Well, yes, he agrees, this can be difficult. But in his case, he had met his wife when they played together as young children. As an adult, he recalled their youthful romps and asked for her hand in marriage. Dowries are still an important part of Libyan culture too, Magdi explains to me. Often, a potential groom is required to exhibit a large sum of money in cash to the father of the bride, perhaps a year's wages or more to prove his ability as a provider. Given this requirement, in addition to the grave cultural responsibility of wedlock, Magdi tells me that many Libyan men decide not to marry. So if you're one of these men who never gets married, I ask him, does that mean you never have sex in your life? Magdi has told me that I can ask him anything, but now he looks down, embarrassed, and tries to hold back a smile. Yes, he finally says, it can mean this. Bobby, overhearing our conversation, blushes and rubs the back of his neck. Wow, I say. I finally cross paths with Clapperton in the town of Merzouk. He made frequent visits to the bey, or ruler of Fezzan, who lived in the castle in the town, an impressive stone structure that still stands, rising over a deserted courtyard that once held a booming slave trade. Historically, Merzouk sat midway on the caravan route between Tripoli and the sub-Saharan African kingdoms of Bornu, Wadai, and Darfur, modern-day Nigeria, Chad, and Sudan. Libya's history is inextricably linked to the slave trade, as the country had few natural resources and depended almost exclusively on the sale of slaves for its survival. Between the 7th and 19th centuries, half of the estimated 9 million to 14 million black Africans, mostly women and children, that crossed the Sahara to Arab coastal markets, numbers comparable to those sent across the Atlantic to the Americas, passed through Libya. Most of would have entered Merzouk, where slaves were sold to middlemen or fattened up to further travel to Tripoli and Egypt and beyond. Slaves weren't the only ones to cross this desert. In the early 20th century, explorers passed through this area in search of one of the world's last great mysteries, the lost oasis of Zuruzura. In the 1920s, when exploration was all the rave, rich young adventurers gathered under the auspices of the Royal Geographical Society of London to form the Zuruzura Club, dedicated to finding the truth behind the legend. Originally mentioned in a 15th century Arab text, the Book of Hidden Pearls, Zuruzura was described as a white city in the midst of the Sahara full of great riches. The first European reference to it appeared in 1835 in a book written by a British Egyptologist. There was a reference to an oasis deep in the Libyan desert full of palm trees, springs, and ancient ruins. Still, by the 20th century, no one had found it. If it existed at all, explorers surmised it must be located in the middle of the nearly impenetrable sands of eastern Libya. Technology finally caught up with the search in 1933, with Hungarian Laszlo Almasi, the real-life English painter, flying his biplane over 3 unknown wadis, dry riverbeds, among the cliffs. Further exploration on foot revealed no sign of gold or ruins, but Almasi was convinced that these were the Zuruzura oasis. His discovery all but closed the books on the legend, though some scientists and explorers still believe it is yet to be found. As I do. I conduct my own search for information about Zuruzura among the supposed caretakers of the secret, the fearless nomadic Tibu people, Saharan Aborigines, whom some experts believe to have inhabited Zuruzura. Clapperton described them in his journal as thieves to a man who steal from all. The reputation still stands. The presence of armed, outlaw Tipus prevent me from travelling through the various regions of Fezzan in search of Zuruzura. It isn't easy finding this elusive people. They number only about 1,000 in Libya, and I hear about a small scattering of them on the outskirts of the desert oasis of Zawalia. As our desert land cruiser approaches the unusual clusters of conical thatch huts sitting in a dusty wasteland, I feel my apprehension rise, recalling explorers' terrifying accounts of confrontations with the Tibu. But when I exit the vehicle, their chief, Sidi Lozo Mohammed, greets me cordially and welcomes me to his village. Noticeably, no one speaks Arabic. Unveiled women come out to meet our group, unperturbed by the presence of male strangers. I ask some of the older men of the tribe if they know anything about the location of Zuruzura. Their eyes dart over my face. They smile quickly, cryptically. No, they know nothing. Almasi alleged, tricked of an old Tibu camel herder into revealing the names and locations of the Zuruzura wadis, but these men will tell me nothing. I give up the search for now, and we head east to the village of Termisa, where the road and civilization ends. We have a second vehicle, a truck, a safety precaution for deep Saharan travel. Our entourage now includes 2 drivers, Omar number 1 and Omar number 2. A cook named Mohammed and Magdi make 6 of us in total. We're in search of a spectacular desert anomaly that rises in the center of the Sahara, an extinct volcano called Wa An Nimus, volcano of the mosquitoes. Finding it will require several days of off-road driving through one of the driest deserts on Earth, lucky to receive a millimetre of rain every 3 years. We're bringing several large jugs of water, as well as an entire petrol drum of fuel, just to be on the safe side. We enter the western edge of the Libyan desert, crossing a flat, roadless plain of sand. Omar number 2 hits the gas, but no matter how fast we move, no matter in which direction we look, the view remains exactly the same. Flawless blue sky stretching over amber-coloured sand. The land cruiser's odometer reaches 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. Nothing changes. We shoot through an empty, vast landscape that makes a mockery of our speed, that seems to have no beginning or end. Our land cruiser slows down as we descend from the high plateau onto a gravelly plain that runs between 2 mountain ranges. It's getting hot. My thermometer reaches the high 80s and keeps climbing. There is no sign of life, no trees, no bushes, no animals, just the rocky expanse of the Libyan desert. Up until the beginning of World War I, this desert remained one of the world's last unexplored regions. To attempt crossing it was suicide. As the sun sets, we stop to set up camp below a large white dune, and I lay my sleeping bag under the stars. Sleep in the Sahara and you can see every star in the graceful curve of Orion's bow. The great sweep of the Milky Way at his back. A small desert rat climbs over me and stops only inches from my face looking at me. No fear. It has never seen the likes of me before and probably never will again. I move a hand towards it and it takes a brief step forward before slipping off into the night. I discover that the desert has its own soul, and it isn't insignificance that I feel in the face of this, but an aching candour of being alive. These great dunes around me, carved and shaped by the wind, baked by the sun, were once stone, and if mountains can dissolve, then what of me? So much more fragile, so much softer, and so quick to bleed and easy to destroy. Maybe it's a heady reflection, but I think it, lying in the sand, gazing at this world, the marvel that I am here. The marvel of it. And that is all I seem to be able to put into words, that I can endure out here, in my sleeping bag, under stars too innumerable to calculate, such an ecstasy of wonder and gratitude. I am here, I am here. The volcano, Wa'an Nemus, reminds me why I travel. To see what cannot be imagined, to be taken into my dreams. It rises from the gravel plains of central Libya, a large black mountain, several thousand feet high, 20 miles round. We drive to the top. Though the volcano was officially discovered by an Italian explorer in 1931, the nomadic tribes of the Sahara have known about it for centuries. According to local legend, they send offenders here to be exiled. But what a place to spend the last days of one's life, looking down to the crater from the lip of the enormous volcano, at a turquoise lake surrounded by palm trees. Seeing any water at all in this desert, let alone a large lake and a verdant spread of grasses, is more than I could have asked for. It's surreal, unbelievable. I hike down to the bottom of the crater with Bobby, while Magdi and the others take the vehicles. What looked like grass from the top of the volcano I see thick patches of reeds that surround the lake. Hoping to reach the water, I shove my way through them. They only part with a fight, and I look down to see blood covering my hand. A reed is cut through the meaty underside of my figure to the bone. Still, I'm too close to the water to give up now. Pushing through one last patch, I emerge on the edge of the lake, which proves so large and deep that wind cuts waves across its surface. Salt and mineral excretions have solidified along the edge of the pool, over thick black mud. As I walk to the water, I sink to my thighs in the muck, and my clothes and hiking boots are saturated with the foul-smelling ooze. Magni and the others look at me, alarmed as I emerge from the thicket, my clothes saturated with mud, my hand covered with blood. My finger needs stitches, but we're about 250 miles from the nearest civilization, and I ask Bobby if I can borrow his sewing kit. He has one of those cheap jobbies they give away in hotel rooms with a flat, dull needle wholly inappropriate for piercing through human skin. But I thread the needle and do my best. The blood makes things slippery and inconvenient. Maji and the Omars stand back by the car, watching in horror. I finish up, cutting the excess thread with a pair of toenail clippers, just like working with leather back home. For the past few days, we've been busy following Clapperton's trail to the far southwestern corner of the Fezzan, this region known for its mountains. The Jibal Akakus attracts more tourists than any other area of Libya, with giant stone arches, narrow mesas, and otherworldly rock formations. The Akakus are a geologist's paradise, offering indisputably some of the most unique desert vistas in the world. Bobby, an accomplished climber, enamored of the small black sandstone spires, has been practicing his bouldering skills while I wander among the rocks, listening to the desert silence. But just as Clapperton went on to the old Saharan caravan town of Ghat, so do we, arriving just after noon in the dusty, idyllic town of around 16,000 people. Once a major stop on the trading route from Timbuktu, Ghat was, and still is, controlled by Tuareg tribesmen. These hearty nomadic people can be found all over the Sahara, though in Libya most have settled down in towns. We rendezvous with the Tuareg men who are supposed to guide us for the next few days, but Maddie explains our plans. He says, "To hell with you," and walks off. This becomes the unusual reaction whenever we approach any Tuareg about guiding us, and all because I want to visit the Devil's Hill, Kaf Ajnoun. It's a curious series of eroded sandstone peaks jutting from the dunes north of Ghat, unique not only for its two obelisk-like spires or horns. It is also believed to be a grand central station for genies, spirits, for thousands of miles around, and not just any spirits, but those most wicked and base, the spirits of torturers and murderers, the spirits of the wrongly slain, lost and sickened soul attracted to the vortex that is Kaf Ajnoun. Clapperton and his companion Dr. Walter Udney camped near the mountain, to the terror and vexation of their Tuareg guides who believed that small red-bearded devils lived on it and caused mischief to all who passed, while spirits taking on the appearance of old men materialized out of the night to terrified lone travellers. It was considered akin to suicide to go anywhere near the dreaded mountains. Wrote Clapperton, "My guide, Hatita, said he would not go up for all the dollars in the world, and it's the same story now in Ghat. No Tuareg willing to travel with us to the mountain, no matter how much we pay. They all have their own stories. There were the French tourists a few years back. They drove out to the mountain, thinking it'd be a good joke to climb it, but as soon as they got out of their car, they were attacked by swarms of wasps. Libyan authorities found the group wandering along the road, unable to get back to their vehicle, their faces covered with stings. And this, I'm told, was minor. Much worse has occurred, like the Libyan soldier at a checkpoint near the mountain who saw something so awful, so terrifying, that he went into shock and couldn't walk for a year. To this day, he is still unable to speak of what he saw. And then there is the man who swore by Allah that he saw an entire army division march around the base of the mountain one night, ghost army, that disappeared before his very eyes. Ajnoun and its vicinity has been considered a stomping ground for evil genies for centuries. Intrepid Arab traveller Ibn Battuta first wrote about this desert in the 14th century, describing it as a place haunted by demons. If the traveller be alone, they make sport of him and disorder his mind, so that he loses his way and perishes. Western explorers journeying in the Fezzan regarded such tales with derision, determined to see the mountain to try to climb it. In 1822, Dr. Udney made the first recorded attempt, reaching the mountain's 4,500-foot high saddle and returning without incident. The doctor has got a high reputation for courage for his visit to Ajnoun, Clapperton wrote about the friend's successful climb, and every newcomer is sure to ask him about it. Later, explorers were less successful. British adventurer John Richardson attempted to climb in 1853, getting lost in the descent and wandering in the desert, near death for 2 days. Robust German explorer Heinrich Barth had an almost identical experience in 1857. I am determined to see the place. I want to climb the mountain. We decide to go there unguided. Majdi tells me that Omar No. 2 has pulled him aside last night to ask if I'm crazy. Don't I know that it's lunacy to climb Ajnoun? If Majdi were a truly responsible guide, he would advise me against it before something awful happens. But Majdi shrugged. He is a cosmopolitan with a degree in French literature. He lives as far from this corner of the Fezzan as a person in Anchorage lives from Tucson. What does he know? If I wanted to risk my life climbing a mountain haunted by demons, so be it. Inshallah, God willing. I'll make it to the top and back down again. Bobby is the least chagrined of the group. He recently lost one of his closest friends in a car accident, so screw the evil genies. Hell, maybe something good will happen to him if he climbs the mountain. We strap on our backpacks and head up the nearest slope. The ground is covered with rocks and boulders that prevent any kind of easy walking. Still, gratefully, no wasps. We ascend a ridge on the far western edge of the saddle, some distance from the mesa, but seemingly to provide the smoothest way up. In a short time we reach the top. Golden dunes spread out like serpent tails across the valley below. Beyond them, the black rise of Akakus Massif glitters in the heat waves. I see that I'm standing on the broken remains of fossilized plants, a whole mountaintop of them, as if Medusa cast her eye down upon a prehistoric jungle, turning it to stone. I find a piece of old climber's rope lying among the rocks. Dr. Udney's? The hemp just crumbles to dust in my fingers. This has been the easy part. We hike along the top of the saddle, the route barely 3 feet across, with sheer drops on either side. It's more like a bridge, the wind fierce and slapping my hair across my face. When we reach the mesa, it doesn't look good. A great wall of stone rises 40 feet before us. After scouting around, we find a fissure of loose sandstone. It's our only way up, and thankfully Bobby goes first. I watch him climb slowly, meticulously, pieces of rocks breaking off beneath his feet. Footholds and handholds are few, but he welcomes this challenge. I don't, following reluctantly. This would be the time for some mischievous genie to push me to my death. Nearly at the top, the rock I'm standing on loosens and snaps off, shattering on the boulders below. I cling desperately to the cliff, searching for a new place to put my feet, finding only an unreliable ledge. Shaking from adrenaline, I keep climbing, finally reaching the flat top of the mesa where I realize a climber's greatest anxiety, getting back down. But it was worth it. Before us is one of the two spires, a giant rectangular block of sandstone rising over 120 feet. With flat sides and a sharp 90-degree angles, its proportions so near perfect that it almost looks man-made. It has such an uncanny resemblance to an obelisk that I search its sides for signs of ancient writing. Nothing. There's no sign of humanity whatsoever in the small mesa. No cairns, no climber detritus, no markers. Other climbers must have made it up here, though I can't be sure. Down below, a tiny dot of white in a sea of sand sits the land cruiser, waiting for us. Bobby and I enjoy the view for a while, but I'm anxious to get back down, to get off this mountain. Genies may not have attacked me, but I do feel as if I've pushed my luck. We descend the same way we came up, looking for our own little cairns to show us the route down the rock faces. Before long, I'm on the rocky slope below the saddle, heading in the direction of the vehicle. It occurs to me that Libya itself is like Jinn, the den of evil genies, the bastion of all my fears. Al-Qaeda, terrorist cells, Qadhafi, a country full of bogeymen lurking in every crevasse. When Magvi and the others see me and Bobby safely return, they smile and let up a cheer. So much for all our fears. We stop at a tourist camp along the highway outside the town of Qala'a and indulge in our first shower in nearly 2 weeks, and a hot shower no less. Omer number 1 is literally singing in cleanliness as we both hang up our laundry on asiyas to dry in the sun. Happily, I can get a comb through my hair again. Gloriously refreshed, we head off to Gabroon Lake, one of the largest salt lakes in the Sahara. It is a great place to sunbathe and swim. I change into a pair of shorts and a tank top, risque to the Omars, who give me a double take, and jump into the lake, watching Bobby clamber up a 1,000-foot high dune. Gabroon is the only place in India where you can sand ski. He reaches the top, puts on the skis he rented, and a moment later he's shooting downhill, kicking up clouds of sand. I'm still hoping to find Clapperton among these eroding and rock plains up the Fezan to pick up his exact trail. I arrange to hire camels and Tuareg guides so that Bobby, Magdi, and I can recreate one of his most treacherous desert journeys, his route deep into the Qala'a sand sea to a remote oasis called Trona. We arrive at the town of Turkitba to rendezvous with our Tuareg guide Salak Mohammed. They have 5 camels with them, including a pure white Maheri. This latter, an expensive pedigree animal descended from Arabian racing lines, carries its dainty head higher than the others, whiffing gracefully at our scents. The other 4 are a motley crew of mud camels from Chad, a black belligerent one that roars and froths at anyone who comes near, a sprightly grey one with white splotches and 2 beige ones. The Tuaregs choose 2 as pack animals and load all our gear and supplies into bags on either side of their bellies, the unlucky pair growling in wrath with every tug of the girth. The ultimate desert machines, camels can drink nearly 25 gallons at one fill, more than twice what it takes to top off the tank of my Toyota back at home, lasting them in a cooler winter season several weeks without refill. Clapperton tries to take a Maheri camel back to England with him as a gift to the King of England, so I ask if I can ride ours and see what the big deal is. The Tuaregs tug at its nose reins and hiss the animal down to a bony knee squat. I use the curve of its neck as a launching pad, leaping into the saddle, and it raises so abruptly that I'm nearly thrown off. These Tuareg saddles must take a lifetime to get used to. The seat is small and hard like the top of a stool, with a narrow piece of wood in the front and back meant to secure the rider in place, in theory. For some reason, the front saddle horn has 3 sharp points, the only purpose of which seems to impale the camel, rider, or both should you fall. I nearly missed being secured several times as my sleek white Mahari decides on a whim to sit down, and it doesn't just sit, it falls, kind of a headlong lurch that sends me tumbling to the ground. The Tuaregs decide to try me on another, the largest of their camels, an enormous beige creature called Watani, meaning the Patriot. Sitting on top of him, my toes barely touch his neck, the only one of our 5 male camels that was allowed to keep his testicles. He walks with a slow, proud strut as we head off into the desert. Camels themselves are more of a novelty than a necessity in Libya these days, with the formerly nomadic people buying cars and settling down in Qadhafi's modern towns so their children can receive an education. Libyan Tuaregs still keep some camels in the family for wedding ceremonies and racing, but most of the Tuaregs I've spoken with agree that nomadic life in Libya is all but gone. Which might explain why, as we head across the desert, we have become a tourist attraction. Flocks of land cruisers making a beeline towards us. These frequent visits scare the camels and halt our pace, as guffawing French and Italians line up to get their pictures taken beside our Tuareg guides. But soon, thankfully, we head north into deeper desert, and the land cruiser trails vanish from the sands. We travel through a gradually rising valley, encircled by high beige dunes, our barefoot Tuareg guides leading the camels. It becomes only us and the sun now, which burns my skin, even as the cool breeze gives constant gooseflesh. There is no getting comfortable in the Sahara. It's always too hot or too cold, as if out of spite. At sunset, we stop among the dunes to camp. The peace of the desert like a blanket over us, calming thoughts, settling moods. The scene seems almost perfect. Then we get the news. Someone forgot to pack our drinking water. Unfreaking believable, I say to no one in particular. What would Clapperton think? Mahdi searches through our baggage strewn about the desert, and all at once he makes the discovery. The dishwater. He found a jug of it. And it's safe to drink that, I ask, incredulous. No problem, he says. But early in the morning, my bowels do a double take. I might actually have a bowling ball caught in my intestines. Our Tuareg guides seem unfazed, getting up after dawn, eating a slow breakfast, and taking all of the 3 hours to load our camels and break camp. We'll leave at a pitiable late hour of 10 a.m, whereas Clapperton and his guides left each day at around 5 a.m, typically travelling 12 to 15 hours a day. We travel from sunrise to sunset without halting. Clapperton wrote, having only 2 meals a day, one before we start and the other one before we halt for the night. We, on the other hand, end our second day well before sunset, stopping near a small salt lake of al-Ma. I hold a powwow with everyone, Magdi translating, and ask our 2 Tuareg guides if we can try to do things the way Clapperton did. No being easy on us foreigners, no late breakfasts or early dinners. I want to experience the real deal camel travel from dawn to dusk. Reluctantly, they agree. As I go off to take a swim in al-Ma, I'm beginning to fear what I've asked for. The next morning, everyone is up early, mobilizing, breaking camp and packing animals. And we have a new guest, a Tuareg named Yahya, who Magdi brought in to guide the 2 Tuaregs who were supposed to be guiding us. Wearing a traditional Tuareg face wrap and a not-so-traditional fluorescent yellow jacket, Yahya proves to be the real deal. He doesn't tolerate loitering, frequent stopping, bathroom breaks, or anything that can result in the slowing or stopping of our pace. Already, I like him immensely. A go, go, go kind of guy. He takes hold of the reins of Majeri and begins walking, never looking back. If we want to get to Trona tonight, he insists, we need to get moving and stay moving. For the entire day, expect at least 11 hours travel. Our less than the real deal Tuareg guides yell out, begging him to stop and wait for us, but he's having none of it. We all scamper to get organised and mounted on our camels. Just as I'm about to leap onto the Patriot, I put a hand where I shouldn't on his neck, and he swings his enormous head over like a crane, chomping down on my calf. Still, there are things to be grateful for. For instance, that camel teeth aren't exactly pointy, or that, by luck, I chose to wear my long johns beneath my pants, protecting me from what could have been 2 very deep puncture wounds. But camel jaws are similar to a pair of vice grips, easily squashing muscle, and in a short while my lower leg begins to turn black and blue. Meanwhile, Yahya is a tiny figure distant in the heat waves, his fluorescent yellow jacket like a beacon in the great sea of sand. No longer on speaking terms with the Patriot, I trade him for a friendly grey camel, which is refreshingly low maintenance. Basically, all I have to do is steer and hang on. Our group rushes to catch up with Yahya, and we leave behind a wide valley heading into the high dunes. It's fortunate for us that he knows where he's going because none of the rest of us do. One dune just looks like another. It would be easy to get lost among them. Yahya tells us about finding one such unfortunate a few years ago, reduced to a dried up corpse in the sand. Never underestimate the desert. As the sun begins to set, we follow a narrow wadi due east. Finally, there are brushes and signs of life. A large-eared fox trotting behind a dune. Yahya has been walking at a near jog, barefoot, for over 9 hours now, stopping only when the rest of us decide to have lunch. And he hasn't once drunk water or taken a toilet break. Little wonder that the Tuaregs can carry a reputation for endurance and hardiness in the desert. Me, I try to walk along with him, leading my camel, but the coarse desert sound soon scours the soles of my feet and covers them with blisters. The trade-off is riding, but the saddle chafes my inner thighs and ass until they feel raw. How, I wonder, can anyone travel like this for more than a few days? Yet Clapperton did it for months, for years. I imagine the weeks he must have suffered until he came to habituated to the saddle. I wonder if there's anyone left in this world who compares to the explorers of old. The bad water I drank from the previous night has me bloated and nauseous. The jouncing of the camel only exacerbates my discomfort. I want to get to Trona, and soon. Already the sun has set and our group climbs up the steepest dunes we've yet encountered, and at the top of the highest we look off in the dusky distance. Down below is an enchanting sight. An island of green that can only be Trona. Nestled in the nook of the sand hills that rise several hundred feet in the uninhabited oasis, with its quaint blue lake, forests of date palms looking all the more wonderful after nearly 12 hours of hard travel. The camels raise their heads and sniff the air. Yahya begins to sing. Everyone, human and beast, suddenly picks up their speed, rushing down the dune and trotting anxiously to the sanctuary of green. We arrived at Wadi Trona, Clapperton wrote, and pitched our tents among the date trees. Haji Ali brought some water, which we drank with greater relish than if it had been the sweetest wine. Trona is still fresh water, a cool oasis pool and all the dates I can eat, but more important, there is rest. Though I'm back in Tripoli, I'm still at Trona in my mind, sitting in the silent emptiness of the Sahara, with the stars above whispering their infinity. Walking with Magdi in the noisy streets of Libya's capital, I come upon Azwariya, a Sufi mosque which is having its evening service. Sufism is considered heretical by many Muslims for its belief that one can merge with God, a belief that has forced this mystical tradition underground in many Muslim countries. In Libya, however, it enjoys a place of tolerance in society, as Azwariya can be found in every major town across the country. Chanting filters into the dusk, and I ask Maji if I can witness their ceremony. We enter the Zawiya's long courtyard. The sheikh comes out, the equivalent of a priest. Magji explains my interest, and Sheikh Hamza tells me that I can watch the ceremony through the open window, but that's the best he can do. Females are not allowed inside. I take my place where instructed and looking through the metal bars into the prayer hall. The ceremony or zikr begins. Men form two large circles, some of them glancing at me through the window with suspicious, questioning eyes. A man begins to play guitar, singing poetry of the Muslim saints, and the group starts beating on little drums. All of this is unique to Sufism, Maggi explains. It is how initiates meet God and enter into union with Him. The two circles began swaying and bobbing, slowly at first and then more frenetically. My own body is moving to the rhythm. The music increases in volume. Allah, Allah, the men chant louder and louder, their entreaties turning into shouts. After close to half an hour of this, the music reaches its peak, becomes a great cacophony of sound that stops with such abruptness that its ensuing silence seems almost profane. Everyone looks around, as if suddenly returned to earth, unsure momentarily of where they are or why, and now something strange is happening throughout the room. bodies contort, limbs freeze in strange positions, men drop to their knees, quaking and sobbing. Those who can move help the ones who cannot, massaging bodies back into movement and holding anyone who cries. One man points helplessly at his throat, as if something were stuck inside. Water is brought and poured out for him, which he swallows in a rush. The ceremony over, an assistant passes around a little shot glass full of coffee with slices of bread. I don't expect him to remember me, but he comes over to the window smiling, offering me a glass. As the men file out, I stay back, away from the courtyard, but no one seems to mind my female presence now. When I see the man who'd been clutching his throat, I call out to ask him how he is. "Galway he is," he says. "Good." His eyes are bright and dancing. "Where are you from?" It is my last night in Libya, and yet the question still gives me a touch of fear. "America," I say. He looks unfazed. "Have you seen a Sufi ceremony before?" he asks. I tell him no. "You're welcome," he says. An incredible story, I'm sure you'll all agree. Now, I mentioned at the start of the show that Kira's companion, Bobby Model, died not long after the trip to Libya. And I think it's only right that, in remembrance of him and his work, that I read his obituary as published by National Geographic on the 17th of September 2009. We're terribly saddened to deliver the news that our dear Bobby Model passed away yesterday. We do not have any details yet from the family. Bobby first came to National Geographic when he was part of the team that climbed Trango Tower in autumn 1995, a feat which was featured in the April 1996 National Geographic, and Bobby appeared on the cover of that issue. Images that Bobby shot on that expedition were published in the magazine. While Bobby continued to climb at an extremely high level, upon the urging of his climbing partner, Todd Skinner, he pursued a career in photography and went on to cover relief work in Sudan, the Balti peoples in Pakistan, and other topics in Africa while he was based in Nairobi. He shot articles for National Geographic Adventure and worked with David Harvey on his coverage of Nairobi for the National Geographic Africa issue. When Bobby was injured outside Cape Town in June 2 years ago, he was miraculously able to survive what would have been for most a fatal head injury. He struggled through a host of extremely challenging medical issues in the coming months at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and then at Craig Hospital in Denver, which specialized in brain and spinal cord injuries. He was released from Craig to a home care almost a year ago, and has been living in Cody, Wyoming, where his mother and father and sister reside. No question, Bobby was one of the most outstanding individuals with whom I've worked in all my years here at National Geographic. For all of his talent, he was incredibly modest and unusually thoughtful about how he approached anything in life. An incredible athlete, a talented photographer, and he was by all accounts one of the nicest guys you'd meet anywhere. Bobby valued his relationship with National Geographic tremendously and was honoured to be named an emerging explorer and to have received a grant from the Expeditions Council. When we delivered a signed poster to him from last year's Explorers Symposium, he had a huge grin on his face, and his mother said he looked at that poster every day after and it brought a smile to his face. We will all miss Bobby, and I will be extending everyone's love and sympathy to Bobby's family today. And that was written by Rebecca Martin, the then director of the National Geographic Expeditions Council. If you'd like to see more of Kira Salak's work, then do check the show notes. Equally, if you'd like to see some more of Bobby Model's photography, then do check the show notes as well. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you. I'm Dara Mason. You've been listening to The Spirit Box. Bye. Take care.